When we look across C40 cities, particularly over the last couple years, we've seen an emerging air quality crisis. Many of the mayors who are here and represented in the room certainly face this problem in their cities. There's about 5 million people around the globe each year who are dying prematurely from poor air quality. And 80% of all cities actually exceed the World Health Organization's limits for unsafe air. And so this is a really real and pressing problem. Those of us who work in climate change and in broader environmental issues, as I do, can't help but see the overlap. A lot of the things that we need to do to bring down emissions and tackle climate change also have huge benefits for air. As Patricia Espinosa was saying this morning, when you're looking at construction, mobility, transport, these are all areas where we can do a lot to clean up our air and also tackle the climate crisis. So we have a great group of panelists today, and I think that we have an interesting moment here in this conversation to bring together the voice of new technologies, David with clarity, and the low-cost air quality sensors that his company works in partnership with Mexico City and other cities to deploy. Jeremy Heimans with Purpose, who's quite expert in building social movements, has a new book coming out next year called New Power. On exactly this question of building social and economic models. Paulette Frank with Johnson & Johnson bringing in the business voice here, and then Tor Henrik bringing in the voice of the city of Oslo, which many of us know leads the world in per capita electric vehicles, but also has quite a lot to say about bringing together what we can do on all of these sectors, transport, in addition to construction and some of these other sectors. The last thing I'll say is that one thing for those of you who may not be as familiar with the C40 network, just to know, is that one of the areas where Mark Watts and C40 and the team really excel is at looking at the places where mayors have quite a lot of authority, where there are issues where they can act on their own, and make big progress. And so as we bring in, thinking about the last conversation with Governor Brown and Tom Steyer about the limits of what we're facing in Washington, or even the limits on state policy, as they noted, there is quite a lot that mayors can do, particularly in these issues of land use planning, transport, waste management, and other things. And C40 mayors are really pushing the upper limits of what they can do there at the same time that they're advocating for the policy that can raise that ambition as well. So that's all by way of context for our conversation. Jeremy, you are sitting in a unique seat here and having done quite a lot of deep thinking about the role of citizens and social movements. And so from your perspective, looking at the air quality crisis that many C40 mayors face, what can citizens do?
Well, thanks, Antha. It's great to be here. I think citizens can do a lot on this issue, right? This is not an intangible, abstract issue. This is an issue that really speaks to people's daily lived experience. So I think the challenge for movement builders is how to bring that alive for ordinary people, right? So in the work that we've done in places like India, a couple of things have been important. One, those of us here are going to frame this issue largely in terms of climate change, but climate change is often not going to be the right entry point for ordinary people, right? As we all know, grounding it in people's health, in people's lived experience, is stronger. Secondly, I think one thing we found in our work in places like Delhi, where we launched this really interesting initiative called Help Delhi Breathe, is you want to bring together unlikely people in a community to create the kind of social movement that isn't just the usual suspects. So if you just had environmental NGOs leading the fight, that wouldn't be enough in a place like Delhi. So you bring together nurses, teachers, cultural influencers like Bollywood stars. You bring folks who are really at the forefront of the economy. And in the case of Delhi, we got rickshaw drivers to be the kind of spokespeople for this campaign. And rickshaw drivers, of course, are sort of ubiquitous in Delhi. They're a big part of the culture. And having rickshaw drivers start conversations with their passengers about this crisis is fundamentally different to a kind of message, blared from on high, about these issues. So I think, unlikely coalitions are really important, grounding it in folks' health, but you can't just kind of say, well, this is a crisis. You have to pivot to the solution. And what we've found is embedding it in sort of actionable solutions that both individuals can do. So if you're taking your kids to school and you're driving them there, just telling parents not to keep their engines on outside the school sounds really trivial, but it's actually part of how people embody the message and begin to understand that they have agency over something like this.
Well, and I imagine making them feel part of the solution at the same time, where they realize the limits of what they can accomplish on their own. Tor Henrik, I want to turn to you because you've done a lot of thinking on this issue and on transport and construction and the various sectors where there are a lot of emissions in Oslo. And so I wonder if you could speak to, our mantra at Bloomberg Philanthropies, coming from Mike Bloomberg, is that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so talk to us a little bit about where emissions and air pollution are coming from in Oslo and what kind of policies you're putting in place to tackle them.
Yeah, first, thank you for inviting us to participate. I think what we've done in Oslo is that we try to find out where emissions come from to make the right policies. So after measuring and finding out what are the main sources for pollutions, then you can make the strategies. So we've made a climate strategy that goes through all different sectors of our own local community. And I mean, the municipality of Oslo as such, we are not responsible for more than about 4% of the total emissions in Oslo. So we need to use our governance tool to govern the city in a way so that we can get other polluters to reduce their pollutions. I think that's very important. So the strategy was very important. We got that passed through the city council. And the second thing we made was a climate budget, where we actually budget CO2 and other emissions in the same way as you budget financial resources. And it's broken down on all different sectors in the municipality. So all different sectors then need to report. In the same way they report on their financial budget, they need to report on their climate budgets. And that makes kind of a competition also within the municipality structures to deliver on the targets set by politicians. So it doesn't only get like a vision of targets, but it actually makes concrete targets. And then about 60% of our emissions comes from transport. So a transport sector is important, very important to get the reductions. And we use one of the tools we have used is to introduce different layers in the toll ring. So you pay more if you drive a diesel car than if you drive a gasoline car than you drive an electrical car. And we made it cheap to buy electrical cars, so that we've taken away the VAT, we're taking away the taxes. You're allowed to drive electrical car in public transportation lane. You can charge your car free in the city center, paid by the municipality, and then you create a market for electrical cars. So now, the last quarter, 50% of all new sold cars in Oslo are electrical. And that you create the mass market and you use governance as a tool to create market, and then market responds. The next thing we're looking into now is construction sites. We found out that out of the 60% emissions we see are from transportation, 1/3 of that comes from construction sites. What can we do through our tendering process? I mean, we have big muscles as a municipality. We're probably the second largest purchaser in Norway. So we can use our muscles in the tendering process and set standards. And then the market has to respond to that. And then, that has started to develop, what you call it, caterpillars, electric caterpillars, and they reduced the numbers of diesel generators and so forth. So I think the use of governance as a tool is extremely important.
That's a really interesting point, and something I know C40 mayors have worked together on is how do you actually create the market for low-emitting technologies. And so the Clean Bus Declaration, which Los Angeles and 25 other C40 cities are part of, are sort of getting at that question. How do we actually say, to manufacturers, demand is here. If you'll make it, we'll buy it, and sort of create the market that way. David, I want to turn to you to talk a little bit about the role of technology here in moving policy progress at the city level on air pollution. And one of the things that I'm thinking about, as you talked about the sort of carbon budget in Oslo, is one of the alarming things, problems with air pollution is that the health effects are linear, right? So actually no pollution is safe, really. So it's really bad if you're above the WHO limits, but actually there's health benefits to reducing pollution down to zero. And so as you think about educating the public and policymakers, what is the role of technology and how can we use it?
Sure. Thanks, Andersen. So what I think about air pollution, I think one very important piece is to effectively measuring it. And I think you need to measure it to know the source of air pollution. And you need to measure it to know the impact of your policies and the effect of the policies on the public. Definitely, I definitely see recently there's a movement of new technology addressing that issue, especially enabled by low-cost air pollution sensors. So what it does is basically, instead of having I think in city generally you have a couple of air monitoring stations to tell the background ambient air pollution data, but that's not enough to tell the air pollution sources, and then that's not enough for policymakers to really see what's the impact of their policy is. So to having a larger network composed of hundreds to thousands of sensing points, I think that's a key to addressing this air pollution issue. We usually make the analogy that policymakers trying to address the air pollution issue like playing a chess game without seeing the chessboard. But with this new technology, I truly believe that this new technology can bring the chessboard into the pictures and can let policymakers clearly see what is working, what is not, which area should you should target it to address, and yeah.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Paulette. I want to turn to you in just a moment, but before I do, Jeremy, I want to pause on that for 1 minute, because one of what David's talking about is providing a much more rich data set to policymakers, right, to mayors. But there is a question when you're working on an issue like air quality and mobilizing the public about how do you make people feel motivated and not just sort of turned off by the scope or the severity of the problem. I mean, we think about this a lot on climate change, of course, because you're talking about global degree change. How do you make people feel empowered? On air pollution, it's almost the sort of flip side. Like, how do you not make people feel like the problem is so bad that they're for their own personal health that they're just live in a bubble and that's all you can do.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So to back up what you said, I mean, our research shows that, for example, when you use children in messaging on air pollution, that is only powerful when you're giving parents something they can do about it. If you just talk about children without giving them the actionable piece, the sense of hope, it's actually a net negative, right? So we have to be really thoughtful about the way we do that. Now, I think some of what David does, that's part of what's actionable. An actionable demand that ordinary citizens can make is to get that data, to have that data made not just useful and digestible to elites and policymakers, but to translate that to ordinary people. And then I think you have to rally people around the inspiring solutions, right? So some of that is about the transparency, and some of it is about, pivoting from Help Delhi Breathe to, Let Delhi Shine, right? Which is a campaign to promote solar. And there's lots of ways that the clean energy solutions, particularly when you sort of ground it in, deep experiences, like, putting solar on the rooftop of a school, that sort of brings it alive for people and takes it out of the realm of the technocratic and brings it into the realm of things that people actually feel like they have some role in, right? A parent feels like they can have a conversation with the school principal about putting solar on the rooftop. They don't necessarily feel like they can have a conversation about, the details of air pollution policy. So you've got to do that translation while all of this really important work is happening at the elite level.
Very helpful. Paulette, a lot of what we're getting at here is how you connect citizens with policymakers, with new technology, bring the business voice in here for us a little bit. You've done quite a lot of thought leadership for Johnson & Johnson's Environmental Health, Safety, and Sustainability Unit and your role. And so how can the business sector partner with cities to move forward some solutions to these problems?
Sure, and I have to just say the other hat I wear is employee safety, so I'm incredibly conscious of not falling out of this chair and becoming a statistic, but more to the point. Johnson & Johnson has had its own commitment to environmental health for many, many years. We've looked within our own four walls. We've had renewable energy goals. We've had goals to reduce our carbon footprint. We intend to be 100% renewable energy by 2050, cut our CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. We've extended that work to our suppliers, and we've been enrolling our suppliers in things like the Carbon Disclosure Project for many years. But we realize that that's within our control, but we also have influence that goes beyond our four walls. And that's why we were drawn to an organization like C40 that has this network of mayors and cities, and for all of the reasons that Executive Secretary Espinosa mentioned earlier about cities sort of being this leverage point of impact around greenhouse gases as well as health impacts, drew us to lend our support, our voice, and also our experience building the case for energy efficiency, for renewable energy in our business, and lending that experience and support to the mayors of the C40 cities.
That's great, thank you. Tor Henrik, I'm going to turn it back to you to bring this together for us a little bit. Sitting where you sit, how do you think about these sectors helping you, right? How does citizen demand, new technology, engagement with business help move forward these policies, in a real practical day-to-day way in the city of Oslo?
I think that's the whole solution, because the city, the municipality by itself cannot find the solutions. We have to do it together with researchers, with activists, with the market and all the businesses. And we see that also when we implement practical politics in Oslo. We have to do that in a very, you have to be clear on your goals, but you have to be pragmatic in your approach. I think that's kind of underrated when you do businesses. And one example, we are now introducing a car-free city center of Oslo. And it's a very large area. And the success of that car-free city center is not to remove parking places. The success is to free spaces for other activities. So it's a lot about the rhetorics, a lot about how you make that presentation for the local businesses, and that they see that they have something to gain. Your example with the child and the parents is the same. If you present a problem for some parents concerning a child, but you don't give them an alternative solution, then they will get depressed, or they will kind of push away from it more than try to move into it. So but you also need to be strict at the same time. In Oslo, we're a city of 660,000 inhabitants, so fairly small in this C40 family. But during winter days, we can have up to 100,000 people that are directly affected by bad air pollution, because of the way that the city it's in a bowl, and it's like a lid that cold air pushes down the pollution and makes a lid over it. And then we have to make acute actions. So this year we had a ban on diesel cars. That was the first time we introduced that. It was only for a day, but we have measurement stations around all city to measure the air pollution. And then we introduced it in the morning. We went out publicly with the information. And when you then tell people why you do this, because it's for the children. I mean, for the elderly, for the disabled, for those with asthma. That's why we introduce it. It's not to punish you, it's to find a solution. Then you get more acceptance for it. And of course, the police didn't have the possibility to police that thing. But it was, we introduced it, and 70-80% followed.
Right.
And that's good enough.
One of the challenges with those kind of changes, which can be contentious, but after the fact are often quite popular, is showing the benefit, right, to real people, being able to benefit people's lives. And so that's where, David, I wonder if you could come in on this a little bit, just on the kind of before after to some of these policy changes and being able to demonstrate that the air is in fact better does seem like one of the central things that mayors need to be able to do.
Oh yeah, definitely. Hello. Yeah, definitely. I think just as I mentioned that in terms of the benefits you can bring with this new technology is really to see these benefits from the specific policies. For example, if you change a certain bus line into all electric buses, then having a sensor network like around the bus route, then can in real time basically communicate that health benefit to the citizens to basically justify the investment, and also be able to justify like bike lane investment, e-mobilities. I think having data to quantify the health impact of this new policy, I think that's what will associate with the citizen the most. I mean, when we looking at this new policy as a citizen, we usually just thinking, oh, it's a fancy new car or something, but it's not. Like they need to be shown the data to basically believe that, and to see directly with their eyes, how many less bad air they have breathed, and how does that impact my children? How does that impact my elder families in the home? So I think that's the key. Yeah.
Paulette?
Just an experience in our company that could be transferable to cities as well. And one of the earlier panelists made the point that sometimes you need policy to kind of kickstart things. And one of the things that we did that really kickstarted our program around energy efficiency and renewables was we created a fund, a capital relief fund. And so every year we have capital relief for renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. And it's not that they're incredibly financially viable projects. They have great internal rates of return. They have great paybacks. But when they're competing with switching out the roof on a facility or putting in a new production line, sometimes that competition can prevent one of those projects from moving forward. So having that sort of internal policy mechanism and financial mechanism available kick-started some of the projects, and then the portfolio started to grow, and then eventually you have a 20% reduction in your cost of energy, and you've got a 20% reduction in your greenhouse gas. So it just starts to really kind of become a self-fulfilling thing.
That financing question is central for a lot of cities, so I wonder if you want to speak to that.
Yes, I think that goes for all cities. So you have to use your own tools, but you also have to kind of make others want to be a part of the team. And we set up a small fund 2 years ago to buy electrical bicycles, because Oslo is very hilly and we want to increase the number of people bicycling. And then if we could introduce electrical bicycles, then we could increase the numbers. Our target is to increase it from 16% to 25%. And what happened was that a lot of people bought or applied for a funding, which could then cover about 1/4 of the cost of buying a bicycle, electrical bicycle, and that kick-started that industry. And what actually happens is that you will see much more electrical bicycles in Oslo today than only for 2 years ago, and much more than our fund has provided, the city of Thunder provided, because it becomes popular. And everybody now sees that, wow, the neighbor has one, and maybe we should buy one as well.
Positive pressure. That's
Positive
good.
pressure.
That's good. Well, with our last couple minutes, I just want to do a little speed right down the line here from each of the panelists to say, given this moment that we're in, the urgency of tackling both climate change and the air quality crisis that confronts many cities, what's something that makes you hopeful?
What makes me hopeful is that we see change taking place. We have just reached the peak, for example, in Oslo of CO2 emissions, and we're now dropping. And we're now down to the 1990 level from where we're going to drop more. So we see that change is taking place. And we see that people are happy with it through elections and results of elections. So I'm hopeful.
So my personal well of hope comes from my children, and specifically a story from when my son was 5, and we were driving on an interstate going to a museum, and he was in the back seat, and his little voice, I heard him say, you know, "Mommy, what are those clouds coming out of those big tall things?" And they were stacks coming out of a facility. And I said, "Oh, those are smokestacks, and that's just steam. It's going up into the clouds." And he said, "But does that make God cough?" And you know, just in that moment, that whole the hope is born, but also realizing that, and someone said it earlier, it's not that complicated, that you can break it down into some really salient, meaningful messages for people, and they will respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think, love that story. I think as a campaigner, usually you're doing very adversarial work. You know, you're pushing up against power. I think what's really positive about a lot of the work that's happening in cities is it doesn't have to be adversarial. It's incredibly collaborative. We can raise up these mayors in many cases as heroes, right? And I think you can root these campaigns in a sort of pride of place, which is both very positive and which sort of gets you out of some of the ways that these issues have become politically polarized, because everybody loves their city, right? And so I think there are really dimensions here that make it very different to a campaign that just feels like it's pushing against a wall, and that makes me incredibly hopeful. Makes our job easier too.
I think what makes me hopeful is the increasing awareness of the air pollutions among the public, and the increasing willingness of the government to act on it. Taking China example, a couple of years ago, it's a super sensitive topic. You cannot talk about it in social media, and compared to now, it's a policy priority for the countries to addressing these issues. And I think like right now is a perfect time to do it. This synergy between the air pollution and climate change is really pushing the government to act on it. And at the same time, I think they're the right community and they're the right technology to address these issues. So I think, yeah, now it's a great time to address this.
Well, and I'm hopeful because of the work of all of our panelists up here. Johnson & Johnson's commitment to these issues. Jeremy's amazing campaigning. If you haven't checked out his TED Talk, over 1 million views on New Power. David, an activist turned entrepreneur that's really moving these policies forward in Mexico City and elsewhere. And the fact that Oslo has peaked emissions and is moving down. So big round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you.